The sea was heavy, as if it breathed deeply and rarely, shaking its cold body under the icy wind. In northern latitudes, the sky is never completely dark. Even in the dead of night there is always a greyish breath of light in it, reminding that above this abyss there is still some kind of world where people live, children laugh, where windows are lit and life is in full swing. But here, in the midst of the silence and the cold breath of the ocean, everything seemed meaningless. The water was viscous and endless. The waves rose slowly, like the sighs of a sleeping animal, and their every movement gave rise to something unknown in the depths. The ship, rocking on the grey waves, seemed like a grain of sand on the body of a giant. The metal of its sides hummed under the onslaught of the wind. The deck creaked, and even the steel seemed to tire under the weight of the elements. Few people worked here. The team was small, but assembled from those who were used to living in isolation, far from sunny shores, obeying not the laws of humanity, but the laws of the sea. They rarely spoke, but listened more. The sounds of the wind, the rustle of waves, the clink of cables, and the occasional instrument signal drowned out by the noise of the ocean. In the midst of this grey silence, there was sometimes a dull metallic thud, rhythmic, almost musical, as if the depth responded to the touch of instruments. And every time the knock was repeated, a chill ran down people's backs. It seemed as if someone down there was answering. For a long time, the research yielded only the same thing: rocks, layers of silt, black shadows of reefs, the silent remains of dead ships. But one day, when the morning had not yet come, and a grey twilight hung over the surface, the sonar devices recorded something else. At first it seemed like a mistake. The signal was too smooth, the contours too precise, as if created by hand, not by nature. The screen showed an elongated shape, like the hull of a ship, but without any characteristic fractures or damage. The length is about 100 steps. The width is dozens. People looked at each other, but no one dared to say out loud what they were thinking. The remains of submarines from the old wars have been found in these waters more than once, but this object was different. It was too symmetrical, too perfect, as if someone had deliberately hidden it under the water to hide it from human eyes. The first attempts to measure its density yielded nothing. The instruments were stalling, the readings were off, the compasses were spinning in a circle. Metal, if it was metal at all, reflected the signals as if it absorbed them. But the main thing was that he was motionless. During all the hours of observation, the object did not waver a single centimeter, as if it was embedded in the seabed. No one slept that night. The sailors sat listening to the wind whistling in the rigging, and everyone thought about what lay down there at a depth of thousands of meters. It seemed to some that there was no sound in the water, but breathing. It's like something huge and ancient is slowly waking up under the water. It took several days before the decision to lift was made. The preparation took time. The equipment was checked. The cables were strengthened. The engines were tested. Everything happened methodically, without haste, as if the team itself was stalling for time, subconsciously not wanting to bring the moment of contact with what lay at the bottom closer. The sea was getting colder every day, as if it had a premonition that people were going to disturb its peace. When the cables were finally lowered and the metal arms of the lifting mechanism reached into the depths, the water around the vessel seemed to have changed. The current became denser and more viscous, and the instruments recorded strange deviations, as if subtle shifts were taking place in the very structure of the sea. The machinery was pulling on cables, metal was creaking, the engines were running at their limit. From the surface it seemed as if the ship was pulling the abyss itself, but the object wouldn't budge. No cable could move him. They dragged on, hour after hour, strengthened the system, redistributed the load, but the efforts were useless. It was as if the ocean itself was holding him in its cold embrace. And then the first failure occurred. The instruments that recorded depth and tension began to produce meaningless values. There was static on the screens. The hands of the instruments twitched, and then everything disappeared. Silence. And in that silence, through the low growl of the wind, came a rumble like a distant echo. It lasted for a few seconds, but it was enough for everyone on deck to feel it inside themselves, as if something heavy and invisible had hit them in the chest. When the readings were restored, it became clear that the object had moved. Quite a bit, but it has moved. The cables trembled, the metal grated, and suddenly the tension dropped sharply. Something down there released him. People rushed to the devices, expecting to see an overload, but the numbers remained stable. A moment later, a ripple appeared on the water, then a wave, as if the surface of the sea sighed. Something huge was rising from the depths. It moved slowly, almost gracefully, leaving a thin trail of bubbles in its wake. It seemed as if the sea itself was reluctant to return what it had once swallowed up. And when the first silhouette appeared in the murky foam, the air above the deck seemed to thicken. A metallic-colored body was rising out of the water, smooth, undamaged, unlike any known mechanism. It didn't shine, but rather absorbed the light. The surface was opaque, with barely noticeable symbols running along its entire length, like writing in a forgotten language. The object lay down on the deck with a heavy hum. Despite its size, the ship withstood, only barely tilting. People stood there in disbelief. There were no rivets, no welds, not even a hint of doors or joints, as if it were a single hole, molded from a single piece of cloth. Attempts to scratch the surface were unsuccessful. Metal, if it was metal, would not yield to tools, acid, or even a laser cutter. Thermal scanners showed a uniform temperature throughout the structure, but internal sensors detected pulsating radiation, barely perceptible, similar to a heartbeat. The symbols covering the surface turned out to be strange. None of the experts were able to determine their origin. They didn't look like Scandinavian runes, Sumerian signs, or any known alphabets. Some of the lines converged into spirals, others into knots, forming shapes resembling interlacing roots. And when the floodlights shone on them, the lines seemed to move slightly, as if they were breathing. A day has passed trying to figure out what it is. The data was transmitted to the mainland, but some of the signals were lost. Communication with the coast was getting worse, as if someone was interfering with the broadcast. And at night, when the storm subsided for a while, a strange glow became visible from the deck. The object was emitting a faint bluish light, as if something was moving somewhere inside. It pulsed slowly, with the rhythm of human breathing, and everyone standing nearby felt a strange sense of anxiety, as if a whisper was beginning to sound inside their heads. The next morning, it was decided to open the structure. No one wanted to be the first, but the order was given. Equipment was connected, lasers were installed, and energy was directed to one point. And then something happened that no one expected. The metal did not melt, did not disperse. It just opened up on its own, as if responding to the impact. The panel slowly slid apart, and thick, icy steam escaped from inside. The air around them immediately became heavier, the temperature dropped, and my breath turned into a cloud of frost. A dull sound like a heartbeat came from inside. People froze in disbelief. Rows of cylindrical chambers stretched inside the opened passage. The glass was cloudy, filled with liquid, in which vague silhouettes floated. The shapes were human, but there was something wrong with them. The arms are too long, the heads are narrow, and the chest is wider than a human's. The bodies seemed to be asleep, but one of the cameras trembled slightly, as if someone inside had moved. The cold was getting stronger. The instruments began to malfunction. The screens went out, the lamps flickered, and the air was filled with a barely audible vibrating hum, similar to a low organ sound. People tried to move away, but their legs felt like lead. It seemed as if space itself had become denser. One of the researchers approached the nearest camera and pressed his palm against the glass. The moment his hand touched the surface, the liquid inside rippled slightly. Something flashed through the murky layer 2 tiny lights. Eyes. They opened, looking straight into him. He recoiled, but it was too late. The camera made a dull crack, as if the glass began to crack from the inside. That night was the last one anyone remembered clearly. After that, the recordings became ragged, distorted, as if someone had cut out chunks of time from them. The sea became restless again. The storm rose. The sky darkened. People were rushing around the deck trying to reconnect, but the antennas were not responding. A rumble like breathing came from the depths of the hull, and the more the wind roared, the clearer this rhythm became. By morning, communication with the ship was interrupted. The signals have disappeared. There was only emptiness on the ocean's surface, quiet and cold. The water became still again, as if nothing had happened. Later, when the search vessel approached the intended location, they found only pieces of equipment and a strangely shaped metal fragment, still warm to the touch, as if it had recently been held by a human hand. The same signs that were on the object glowed on its surface. They shimmered dimly, like smoldering coals, and disappeared when the metal cooled. Official reports called it all an accident, a technical malfunction during the lifting of the old ship. But there were inconsistencies in the archives, sensor readings, traces of energy that should not have been there. And a few days later, fishermen who went out to the coast at night told about a strange light under the water. He moved slowly, like the breathing of something huge. Its color was the same as that emitted by the lifted object, cold, blue, alive. After the disappearance of the ship, the sea became quiet again. The silence seemed to return unnaturally quickly, as if the elements themselves were rushing to erase the traces of what had happened. Soon other ships came to the surface, rescue, military, scientific. They moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if they were afraid to disturb the water itself. People in grey suits lowered buoys, launched underwater drones but found only debris, metal, twisted, some charred, but no signs of an explosion. They searched for bodies, but found none. No flesh remains, no traces of blood, nothing. It was as if the ship had simply dissolved. Even the lifeboats, which were always kept ready, were in place, tightly strapped to their mechanisms, as if no one had even tried to leave. The only thing that caused a real panic was that fragment. A piece of metal, smooth and warm, without kinks, without saw marks. The symbols were still glowing on it, but slowly, as if fading away. When the engineers tried to take the temperature off, the instruments started behaving strangely again. The arrows jumped, the screens flashed, the sensors showed values that contradict physics. Then the fragment was placed in a container, sealed, made of lead and glass. But even through it, there was radiation, not light, not heat, but something else. Some described this feeling as a throbbing inside the bones. The container was sent to a laboratory on the shore, but even before the ship arrived, that night, as it was returning through the cold waters, the crew noticed a strange phenomenon. The water began to glow around the ship, not bright, but soft, smooth, like the moon reflected in a stationary mirror. The light came from below, from the depths. The cameras couldn't capture him, but everyone on board saw him with their own eyes. It wasn't a hallucination. The waves shimmered as if someone was moving below, and barely noticeable circles passed over the surface, as if from the breath of an invisible being. When the container was delivered to the base, only 2 people were working with it. The rest were suspended, officially because of the security protocols, but unofficially, because even then, strange things were starting to happen in the laboratory. First, the clock stopped working. The arrows on the walls stopped. The electronics turned off. Then the camera footage disappeared. Just a black screen, no sound, no image. One of those who was on duty at night later said that he heard a rumble coming from the container. Low, deep, as if the heart was beating behind the walls of metal. He did not admit to anyone, but claimed that he felt the floor vibrate under his feet. In the morning, the container was covered with frost, although the temperature in the laboratory remained above freezing. Then they decided to open it. This decision was not agreed upon. There was no order. The people inside the laboratory acted as if under the influence of someone's will. They didn't argue. They didn't discuss. They just started the autopsy process. When the metal clamps were removed, the air in the room cooled sharply. The same steam that once enveloped the deck of the lost ship was drawn from inside. The surface of the fragment appeared out of the fog, smooth, devoid of kinks, now covered with a network of cracks, as if the metal was aging before our eyes. But the same runes glowed between the cracks. They seemed to be pulsating, breathing. The researchers retreated, and then a sound came from inside the container. A quiet, like a sigh. Not mechanical, not human. Something alive. The light in the laboratory flickered, and then went out. When the emergency power turned on, the fragment disappeared. There was a footprint in its place, as if someone who had been lying there had gotten up and left. The air was thick and cold, and condensation was running down the walls. There were footprints on the floor that weren't human. They reached for the door, disappeared at the threshold, and no more prints were found. After that, The laboratory was sealed. Officially, it's a chemical leak, but people who worked in neighboring buildings claimed that at night they heard sounds like someone walking along the corridors. Sometimes a glow was seen from the windows on the upper floors, bluish, like reflected moonlight, but coming from inside. Weeks have passed. The research was stopped, but the rumors grew. Someone said that the fragment was found again, a few kilometers from the shore, washed up by a wave. Someone claimed that strange signs began to appear on the skin of the fish, similar to those on the metal plate. Local fishermen stopped going out to sea. The water, they say, has changed. She became colder, even in summer, and smelled of iron. Meanwhile, strange records began to appear in the archives of the research center. In systems that have been disabled for a long time, someone left files without a name. They couldn't be opened by ordinary means. When the programmers tried to decipher them, the computers froze, and the screens were flooded with blue light. In one attempt, it was possible to extract only one image, a blurred, hazy one, which revealed the outlines of the very structure lifted from the bottom. Only now she was not on deck, but underwater, surrounded by a cloud of light that looked like the breath of a living organism. Since then, unexplained phenomena have begun to occur in the region. Strange lights were observed in the sky above the coast. Sometimes they moved slowly, sometimes they dived sharply into the sea and disappeared. In some places the water began to glow from the inside, and the fish left. They did not die, but simply disappeared. Seabirds stopped landing on the waves, as if they sensed that something was wrong under them. There are reports of magnetic anomalies in the archives. At a distance of tens of kilometers, the compasses lost their direction, the arrows rotated, and the sound underwater resembled a distant beating. One oceanographer recorded it on a hydrophone. You can hear the rhythm on the recording, smooth, repetitive, like breathing, soft at first, almost indistinguishable, then louder and louder until it merges with the roar of the surf. He compared it to the pulse of a giant creature. No one dared to dive there again, but the devices left at the bottom continued to transmit data. Sometimes images appeared on the screens, vague shadows moving in the dark. At first there were few of them, then more and more. Some of them were human-sized, while others were much larger. In one frame, they recorded something passing in front of the camera. The body shape resembled that of a human, but with disproportionately long arms and a narrow head. When the recording was enhanced, the creature could be seen turning its head towards the lens for a moment. At that moment, the signal was interrupted. The equipment was lifted a few days later. It turned out to be twisted, as if it had been subjected to pressure from the inside. The microphone housings were deformed like soft metal, but the main find was inside. Symbols were imprinted on the glass surface of the lens, the same pattern as on the fragment. Scientists have tried to explain this by natural causes: corrosion, exposure to marine microorganisms, optical effects. But no one has been able to reproduce this. Even after weeks, the prints did not disappear, as if they were part of the material itself. The project was finally shut down soon after. The official reports were classified, and the archives were seized. Only a few pages got out, accidentally posted online before they were deleted. It referred to an unidentified structure of artificial origin, anomalous material properties, and an unknown energy source. Not a word about the creatures, not a word about the eyes that opened underwater. But those who were around in the early days claimed that everything was just beginning. The sea doesn't give away anything for nothing. It stores, waits, and then returns. Sometimes it's not what they took away. In the following months, fishermen increasingly saw the glow underwater. It moved along the coast, sometimes in shallow water, sometimes in the open sea. It was impossible to catch it or fix it with instruments. But every night, when the light appeared, the waves began to go against the wind, and the air became thick and cold. Some said they heard a rumble under the water, as if someone was calling their name down there. It wasn't long before the first disappearances began to be associated with this light. At first, the boats disappeared. Then there are the people. No bodies were found. No wreckage was found. Just empty ships drifting without lights. Inside there is cold, condensation on the walls, traces of moisture, as if someone rose from the sea and left wet prints. And only one fisherman, who was rescued later at dawn, was able to tell what he saw. He didn't remember falling into the water, only that there was something glowing, warm and inviting underneath. In this light he could make out faces, elongated, pale, with eyes that never blinked. They reached out to him from the depths, not hurrying, calmly, like creatures who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. When he was brought on board, he was grey-haired. His eyes remained open, and according to doctors, the pupils did not respond to light. He whispered that the sea was alive, that it breathed, that something was sleeping inside it, and that the fragment was not a body, but a shell. Since then, the coast has been deserted. The people are gone. Towns that lived off the sea have died out. And at night, when the wind subsides, in the distance you can still see the glow under the water, steady, pulsating, like breathing. Over time, light underwater has become familiar, almost a part of the landscape. The people who stayed on the coast tried not to look at the sea after sunset. They said that the light was moving, that it had a rhythm not chaotic but meaningful, as if something was watching and waiting down there. Sometimes the glow disappeared for days, even weeks, but each time it returned, closer to the shore, brighter, more insistent. It did not rise above the surface, as if it was afraid of the sun, but every night there was a barely discernible hum in the air, like breathing. People tried not to talk about it. Those who dared to tell lost their peace. Their houses were getting colder, the mirrors were covered with moisture, and salt water was coming out of the taps. The old men whispered that the sea takes those who speak its secrets aloud. No one argued. Scientific expeditions no longer returned to these waters, but one day a group arrived here, neither military nor state-owned, a private organization whose name no one remembers. They arrived at night without warning, and their ship was without lights. No one saw them unloading the equipment, but in the morning there were traces of heavy machinery, tracks and cables running into the water near the shore. For several days, containers were lifted from the sea. They were dragged to an old hangar on the coast, a huge abandoned building where ships used to be repaired. Now his gates were locked and his windows boarded up. But at night, that same blue light seeped through the cracks, and the locals knew that something was going on there that shouldn't be. There were various rumors. Some said they had found a second object, others that they had raised something alive. Someone claimed to have seen bodies being taken out of the hangar in transparent capsules, similar to those described in the lost records of the research vessel. No one knew where this organization came from or what it needed, but one day, on a moonless night, the hangar caught fire. The fire was strange, not red, but white, almost colorless. It didn't rise up, but seemed to flow down like a liquid. The wind couldn't put it out. When the firefighters got to the place, it seemed to them that the flame was going out by itself, as if it were going into the ground. All that remained of the building was a skeleton of molten metal, and the concrete beneath it was melted, as if after a lightning strike. Nothing was found inside. No bodies, no signs of equipment, only pieces of glass turned inside out, and some of them have the same symbols that were on the object from the bottom, but now they looked different. The lines merged to form something like a map, or maybe a diagram. The symbols were not static. They trembled slightly in the light of the lanterns, like a reflection in water. After the fire, the sea changed. Its surface became darker, denser, and even in daylight it seemed as if a shadow was flowing beneath it. The fish disappeared completely. The bodies of whales and dolphins were found washed up on the shore, not wounded, not damaged, just dead, with eyes in which there was a glint reminiscent of those blue lights. Soon the birds also disappeared. They were no longer circling the water, no longer sitting on the waves. A flock of seagulls, which had been staying off the coast for a long time, rose one morning and flew away without returning. The air became viscous, the sounds were muffled, and at night silhouettes began to flicker in the fog, elongated, silent, gliding over the water. At first they thought they were people survivors, returning sailors, or one of the researchers. But when the fog lifted one day, it became clear that their movements were not human. They didn't walk, but floated through the air as if they were gliding. And when the waves illuminated their silhouettes, one could make out long arms, narrow bodies, and heads tilted at an unnatural angle. The next morning, the shore was littered with dead jellyfish. They lay in neat rows, as if someone had taken them out of the sea on purpose. There were dark patterns on their translucent bodies, the same as on the metal plate. The people who found them claimed that the symbols were moving. The authorities reacted late. The area was declared closed, and an isolation regime was introduced. The city was completely deserted. Only the old people and those who did not believe in any legends remained. But every night the light under the water got closer, and one day it rose. It happened without a sound. The sea didn't roar or roar, it just started to rise. The surface glowed from within, as if the water itself had become a source of light. Something huge rose from the depths, and no one could determine its shape. It was elusive, either metal or flesh. Sometimes the surface of his body seemed smooth as glass, and sometimes alive, breathing. The light coming from it did not dazzle, but penetrated the skin, causing the heart to beat slower. It did not approach the shore. It just stood there, as if watching. Sometimes the light intensified, as if responding to something. Then it faded away again, and every time it went out, strange things happened off the coast. Animals disappeared, power plants stopped working, and the water in the wells turned salty. Observations have recorded that after the appearance of light, the magnetic field around the region has changed. The compasses rotated as if the earth beneath them had ceased to exist. In some houses, clocks were turned off, and metal objects began to vibrate. People complained that they heard whispers at night, not from outside, but inside their heads. The voice was smooth, deep, without words, but everyone understood it in their own way. Some heard the call, others the warning. At that time, one of the scientists who participated in the first expedition lived alone in an old house on a cliff. He was considered a madman, but it was he who first recorded the strange pulsations of sound coming from the sea. He claimed that it was a language not human or bestial, but meaningful. The sounds were repeated at regular intervals, as if someone was trying to establish contact. He compared them to signals sent into space. Only this spring was not in the sky, but underwater. His notes mentioned that every time the sounds were repeated, he felt pain in his temples and saw flashes of light, similar to memories that did not exist. In these visions, he saw a dark surface, mirrors of water, under which shadows moved, and something huge, gliding in the distance, with many eyes. Those eyes didn't glow, they reflected the light like a mirror. The last entry ended in mid-sentence. On the audio file you can hear a deep breath, then a hum like a heartbeat, and then a rustle like someone moving on the floor. After that, silence. When his house was found, it was empty. There are wet handprints on the walls, elongated and narrow. There was an open notebook on the table, and on the last page were painted the same symbols that decorated the metal object. Since then, the rumble under the water has not stopped. It becomes part of the wind, part of the tide. People living kilometers from the coast can feel it at night, in the ground, in the walls of houses, in their own bones. The hum is steady, pulsating, as if the ocean is breathing. And every time the light appears underwater, this rhythm coincides with the human heartbeat. Some say that it is the breath of what has awakened. Others say it's the memory of the sea itself, coming back to life. But no one can explain why at night the water under the shore becomes warm, and in its reflection you can see faces, pale, elongated, with fixed eyes looking up from below. They don't move, they don't call, they're just watching. And if you look too long, the water starts to move. After the disappearance of the scientist, everything became different. The area was officially recognized as an environmental disaster zone, although no one said exactly what the threat was. Groups in protective suits came here, installed sensors, drilled the ground, took samples of water and soil, but soon they stopped appearing. Their tracks were found later, overturned tents, abandoned equipment, strange dents in the ground, similar to the tracks of huge bodies crawling towards the sea. No device recorded the presence of living creatures, but at night, thermal cameras showed dozens of moving spots, elongated, uneven, as if they were moving not on the ground, but under it. Meanwhile, on the coast, in a town that was half extinct, small but frightening events began to occur. People complained that the mirrors fog up, even if the house is cold. In the reflection, in addition to their own faces, one could see vague outlines, as if someone was standing behind them, out of focus. Sometimes they just looked like spots of light, but if you looked closely, you could make out eyes in them. Those eyes didn't reflect the light. They seemed to absorb it. Some started burning mirrors, while others boarded up windows to avoid seeing reflections in the water. But every night the fog grew thicker, and it seemed as if the sea itself was pulling towards the houses, slowly, inexorably. Once there was an old radio tower here, which had long been disabled. One day she started transmitting the signal again. No one could identify its source. The broadcast lasted only a few minutes, a monotonous sound, alternating low and high frequencies, as if someone was trying to reproduce human speech, but did not know how words work. Some of those who heard the broadcast claimed that they recognized in it the voices of those who disappeared at sea. Their intonations, breathing, and habitual pauses were all in place, except for the words. The words were twisted, inverted, as if they had been uttered in water. Those who listened to the recording for too long stopped sleeping. They complained that at night they could hear water running under the house, even though it was several kilometers to the sea. In the morning, moisture really appeared in their basements, and the walls were covered with salt. One day a woman appeared in these places. No one remembered her name, but they said she was an expert on ancient languages. She was attracted by the symbols found on the metal fragments. She rented a room in an old house near a cliff, not far from the place where the missing scientist once lived. All night long she sat by the window, listening to the roar of the sea and watching the recordings. She was not interested in the shape of the symbols, but in the rhythm of their arrangement. She argued that these are not just inscriptions, but a kind of structure that can influence perception. In each line, she said, sound was encoded, not human, but musical in nature. She believed that the object lifted from the bottom was not a machine or a vessel, but something like an instrument created not for sound, but for thought. Later, an entry was found in her diary. This is not a message. It's an invitation. It's not calling out. It's calling in. Those were the last words she wrote. A few days later, her belongings were found in the house. Papers, cassettes, a dictaphone. But she wasn't there. There was ankle-deep water in the room, and a barely audible sound rose from this water, the very rhythm that everyone who approached the sea heard. After this event, the area was completely isolated. It was marked with a grey spot on the map. Access is prohibited. But the satellite images showed a strange thing. The coastline was changing every month. The sea receded, revealing a black, shiny surface that looked like metal. In some places, it stretched for tens of kilometers. The scientists who studied the images claimed that it was not a natural formation. The structure was too regular, with clear angles and symmetry. It looked like something artificial, but not man-made. Hypotheses have emerged. Remnants of an ancient civilization, frozen lava, even a man-made artifact hidden under layers of sediments. But no one dared to go there personally. Only once has a small drone been launched over this area. At first it transmitted a stable signal, a smooth black surface, with no signs of life. Then waves appeared in the image, not on the water, but on the metal itself, as if the material was breathing. After a moment, the connection was interrupted. The last satellite image showed the reflection of something huge, moving beneath the surface too large to be described on a familiar scale. After that, the pictures began to disappear from the open archives. People who discussed them online complained that recordings were disappearing from their devices, and strange shadows remained in the place of deleted files, pixel traces similar to the contours of those very symbols. But in one surviving copy, found by chance on an old server, it was possible to see something similar to the structure, complex, fractal, consisting of repeating elements. It seemed that she was growing like an organism. Then they started saying that the sea is not just water, that there is something hidden beneath it that has nothing to do with Earth or time, and that the object found at the bottom was just a fragment of the whole, maybe a cage. There are new rumors. People who lived far from the coast began to see the same light in reservoirs, in lakes, in wells, even in the rain. Dim at first, then brighter. Fishermen said that the fish in the nets had changed. It no longer had eyes, but it still found its way to the light. At this time, activity was again recorded on the ocean floor. Deep sensors detected movement resembling seismic, but without tremors. The waves of energy spread out in steady pulses, as if someone or something was radiating them with a certain rhythm. The frequency of these pulses coincided with the beating of the human heart at rest. Some argued that this was a signal transmitted not outside, but inside the planet. It was as if the depth was responding. Navigation system failures have begun in several countries. The compass stopped pointing north, the satellites lost synchronization, and radio signals were muffled by a strange hum resembling breathing. People reported nightmares that were identical to the smallest detail. The boundless blackness of the water, the soft light below, and the feeling that someone was calling without words, without sound, but with an insistence that made the blood run cold. A piece of writing was found among the missing scientists' old papers. The handwriting was shaking. If it's alive, it's not from our time. It remembers us, even though we didn't exist yet. After that, the sea line in the satellite images changed again. The black surface, once shiny, began to shimmer. The light came from inside, as if something was moving under the metal, reaching for the air. The sea was breathing, and that breath lasted too long. When the storm passed, the shore was strewn with small fragments. Not stones, not shells, but thin plates, each of which shimmered with a faint inner light. The people who picked them up soon complained of dreams that were too clear, too real. In these dreams, they saw themselves not as people, but as part of something bigger, a structure made up of light and darkness that pulsed like a heart. Every day more and more people began to hear the rumble even far from the ocean. It came from the ground, from the air, from the body itself. No one understood where the sound ends and the thought begins. Some disappeared, without a trace. Their houses were untouched, their belongings were in place, but the smell of salt was in the air. There were footprints in the mirror's handprints, long and narrow, pointing upward, as if someone was trying to get out. No one understood at what point the usual darkness stopped being just night, when light ceased to be salvation, but became only a thin line between worlds. The sea wasn't retreating or advancing now, it was watching. Every tide was like a breath, every ebb was like a glance, and there was a presence in that gaze. Not explicit, but total, as if for the first time the planet itself became aware of its body and tried to remember what lives in it. The hum became constant. At first it was heard only near the shore, then in cities far from the water. It seemed as if the sound was coming not through the air but through the bones. People described it as a heavy beating that coincided with their heart, and the longer they listened, the more difficult it became to distinguish their own breathing from the breathing of something else, much more ancient and deep. In some places the earth began to change. The rocks near the coast were cracking, as if movement was awakening inside them. Metal veins appeared on the cracks, thin threads reflecting the moonlight, as if a network was slowly emerging underground, whose contours were too smooth to be natural. The scientists who ventured to examine the samples claimed that the material was unlike any known alloy. Its temperature remained unchanged under any influence, and the magnetic fields around it were distorted as if it absorbed the very energy of the measurements. Every day, the signal coming from the depths became clearer. On the instruments, it looked like a pulsation, uniform, cyclical, without deviations. But if you listened closely, you could discern a rhythm similar to breathing. It was as if it was trying to adapt to a person, learning, imitating, repeating. People began to have dreams in which the sea talked without words. It showed pictures, not of the past, not of the future, but of something that existed outside of time. In these visions, the earth looked different. There was no land, no sky, only boundless darkness, in which fiery structures floated, similar to living cities. They pulsed slowly, creating waves from which stars were born. Some who had these dreams did not return. They went to the shore into the darkness, as if they had heard a call. Witnesses said they saw the water moving apart in front of them, taking them in without a trace. After that, the sea glowed for several minutes with a soft, silvery glow, as if rejoicing at the return of something of its own. Scientific stations that tried to record frequencies disappeared. The equipment was out of order. The devices began to transmit strange signals, phrases that did not belong to the human language. They were like music in which every note sounded like a call. There was logic and harmony in these sounds, but also coldness. as if the very idea of life had been turned upside down, and a person was seeing a reflection of something he should never have touched. In one of the latest reports sent from the surveillance base, it was recorded. The network is active underground. She's growing up. The structure does not respond to physical influences. She seems to be breathing in sync with the ocean. A few days later, communication with the base was cut off, but just before it disappeared, the sensors registered a sharp burst of energy, a pulse that passed through the entire Earth's crust. He didn't destroy anything, but he changed everything. From that moment on, the night was no longer dark. Faint waves of light appeared in the air, like breathing, expanding and contracting. The shadows did not move after the source, but against it. And the strangest thing is the time. People stopped feeling it the way they used to. The hours ticked by, but it seemed that something else was passing between the strokes of the seconds, invisible but tangible. Some claimed that the days had become longer, others that time had closed in, that events had begun to repeat themselves. The same dreams were recorded all over the world. People who had never met saw the same thing, a huge underwater hall in which the light was burning, soft as the moon underwater. In the center is a structure resembling something that was once lifted from the bottom. Only now it was open, and there was movement inside. The silhouettes, elongated as if born out of the darkness itself, moved smoothly, combining into a single breath. In the morning, after such dreams, many people lost their reflections. Mirrors, windows, water. Everything showed only emptiness. People were starting to disappear, first in small numbers, then everywhere. Governments tried to explain what was happening by migration, disasters and epidemics, but no one believed them. The world became quieter. The cities emptied. In some places, cracks appeared in the ground, from which a faint light emanated. Scientists who ventured closer found the same substance inside them as in the metal plates found. It pulsed, as if it were alive. The instruments showed that the material emits a weak magnetic field that matches the frequency of human brain activity during sleep. It seemed that the Earth began to dream with people. After a while, the familiar glow was noticed on the coast again. It came from the depths and was no longer isolated. There were pulsating points of light along the entire ocean line, as far as the satellites could see. They flickered on and off, forming a pattern, the same one that was engraved on the object. It looked like a network spanning the entire ocean, breathing, synchronized. Then there were rumors about those who had survived the transformation. They were called Deep Ones. It was said that they no longer breathe the air, but live among people, hiding behind their faces. Their skin is pale, their eyes reflect light at a strange angle, and their movements are too smooth, as if the body does not obey the laws of gravity. In their presence, the devices malfunctioned, the water began to vibrate, and the mirrors fogged up even in the cold. Some believed that the Deep Ones were the first ones called by the object, that they are not enemies, but messengers, bearing the memory of what awaits humanity. But others saw them as the beginning of the end. Panic and lynchings began in the cities. People were killed just because they weren't reflected in mirrors. But the more they were burned and buried, the more fog there was, and the louder the rumble from underground became. Over time, the fear became dulled. People stopped looking for explanations. They were just waiting. They were waiting for something that had no name, but was felt by every nerve, every cell. The world seemed to freeze, waiting for its breath, and then it happened. First, silence. Full. There was no wind, no sound, not even the rustle of water. Everything stopped. Then the light. He rose from the ocean and reached for the sky, turning night into day. The light did not dazzle, but penetrated through, as if every cell of the body had become transparent. People stood motionless, and no one could look away. The light didn't last long, just a moment, but it was enough for the world to change. The earth shook, but did not collapse. The air became thicker, the breathing heavier. All the magnetic devices have gone crazy. And then something appeared on the horizon. It had no shape. It was everything at once, a cloud, a shadow, a light. And the longer you look, the more you realize that this something is looking back, not with eyes, not with consciousness, but with the very essence. It didn't come. It opened up, as if it had been here all this time, inside us, under our feet. in the depths of the water, in every molecule of the air. The sea turned black again. But now, in its depths, the light did not fade. It throbbed and breathed like the heart of a planet. In this light, it was sometimes possible to make out outlines, elongated as before, but now huge, stretching beyond the horizon. They were moving slowly but steadily. The ground responded to their movement with a slight tremor. Those who survived the outbreak said they heard a voice, not with their ears, but with their minds. He wasn't threatening, he wasn't calling, he was just telling me. Its meaning was simple. We have woken up. After that, everything became quiet. At all. No birds, no wind, no sounds of cities. Only the pulse of the earth, the hum, the beating. It was as if the world had entered a dream, and no one knew if it was a dream or an awakening. Some claimed to have seen giant halls opening underwater. The light emanated from them, as if from the breath of a living being. Inside there are endless rows of cameras, the same as in that facility, only now open, and silhouettes were coming out of them, slowly rising to the surface. They were in no hurry, but every step they took made the water tremble, the air thicken, and the earth vibrate. Those who stood by the shore did not return. The sea took them in, as breathing takes in air. It was not an enemy, but a home that was finally welcome back. It's unclear how long has passed since then. Time has lost its meaning. Maybe the days are changing, maybe everything has stopped. But sometimes at night, when the sea is calm, you can see a faint glow on the horizon. It moves slowly, in a circle, like the breathing of a sleeper. And if you listen closely, you can hear not a sound, but a feeling, as if the earth itself is listening in response. And deep down, where it all started, the same object remains, now open, alive. Its surface does not reflect light. It creates it. The symbols on it are no longer dead. They are moving, forming patterns like pulsating vessels. Sometimes it seems that there is a whisper inside. Not human, not animal, not machine. It's the whisper of the world itself, pronouncing its own name for the first time. And the moment a person finally realizes that the world is alive, he will realize that he has never been its master. The world as people knew it no longer existed. The sky remained grey, but not from the clouds, but from the thick, almost tangible darkness that hung over the ocean, spreading over the land. The air became as heavy as water, and every breath was difficult, as if the world itself required concentration, making him feel his presence. The rumble underground and underwater became constant, but now it was steady, without changing pace, without speeding up or slowing down, just a pulse, the heart of the world, beating in unison with the rhythm of everything living and dead. The people who remained on the coast gradually disappeared. They didn't scream or resist, just walked towards the water, feeling an attraction that couldn't be rejected. Each step was light and heavy at the same time. The body seemed to be moving apart, dissolving into space. Those who stayed noticed only the eyes, motionless, colorless, reflecting the light that came from the depths. The object that was lifted from the bottom has now fully opened. Its surface was transparent and impenetrable at the same time, as if glass and metal had merged into one. The symbols on it pulsed, creating a sense of rhythm that couldn't be picked up by ordinary hearing. It was not a sound, but a movement that vibrated through the earth, through water, through bodies, and penetrated to the very depths of consciousness. Everyone who tried to write it down or understand it felt pain, dizziness, and emptiness at the same time. The sea has changed forever. It has become a dark mirror reflecting not the sky, but the inner world of each observer. The waves did not move under the influence of the wind, but under the influence of a hidden force emanating from the object. Sometimes the surface of the water flashed with blue light, but it was no longer light. It was a signal, unknown, incomprehensible, alien to human logic. It didn't convey information in the usual sense, but it was felt by the entire nervous system. The heart adjusted to it, muscles tensed, breathing became even and at the same time strangely heavy. Strange objects began to remain on the coast, fragments of metal, glowing tiny plates, transparent drops of liquid that did not evaporate. Touching them brought up images in my brain that were impossible to comprehend. Urban buildings were gradually covered with mold and slime coming from cracks in the foundation, but this substance did not destroy metal and concrete. It only enveloped everything tightly, as if giving the structures a new shape, a new density. In the depths of the ocean, the movement became more and more noticeable. Huge silhouettes, like elongated human forms, glided through the darkness, but now they did not remain within sight. It seemed as if they penetrated the water column, went beyond the visible world, connecting with the object. And when they moved, tiny flashes of light rose on the surface of the water, instantaneous, like flashes of lightning, but they did not illuminate, but only fixed their presence. Those who watched this from afar noticed a strange phenomenon. The signal stopped being chaotic. It has become cyclical, but unfathomable. Its structure defied analysis. Any measurement, be it sound, frequency, magnetic field, temperature, everything indicated a change that could not be explained. The signal was completed, but its meaning remained a mystery. It seemed that the world itself radiates this rhythm, but it is not intended for understanding, but for experiencing, for feeling a deep connection with what exists beyond human logic. Every day the air became denser, the light dimmed. There was no familiar line of water and sky on the horizon. There was only a pulsating band of light emanating from the object. Sometimes it split into two, forming a complex pattern that could not be described in words. It seemed that the object itself was observing the world, evaluating, adjusting, synchronizing. The last people left on the shore felt this power. They no longer understood what standing or walking meant. The bodies dissolved into space and time. Every breath in and out became one with the breath of the planet. Those who tried to resist felt intense pain until they succumbed to the inevitable. In the depths of the night, the water on the surface began to glow simultaneously in many places. It was not a natural phenomenon. The waves did not break. They did not make noise. Everything seemed to be frozen. But under the water, there was a slow movement, continuous and unceasing. Huge shapes of elongated creatures, similar to those in the cylindrical chambers of the object, were slowly heading towards the surface, but did not come out of the water. Their presence was felt through all space, the earth, the air, the mind. At this point, the signal reached its peak. He was not heard with his ears, but with his whole body, with his whole mind. Everyone who stayed on the planet felt him as a presence. It was both a sign, a threat, and an invitation, but it was completely incomprehensible. No logic could decipher it. No words could describe it. It was the essence of the world, which for the first time manifested itself in a form accessible to human perception. Gradually the light began to dissipate, and the pulse subsided. Those who still remained stopped seeing the shape of objects. They only felt their presence. It has not disappeared, but it has become internal, like breathing, like a part of the body, like the rhythm of the heart, which cannot be ignored. The planet has finally plunged into a new phase of existence. The ocean was no longer just water. The earth was no longer just soil. The world has become a single organism, alive and pulsating but inaccessible to understanding. Humanity disappeared or dissolved in this process, leaving no trace, except for the feeling that it was part of something greater. The object remained at the bottom of the ocean. He was no longer detectable, but his presence was felt. The symbols on it continued to pulse, but now as an internal rhythm of the world, as a memory, as a signal, closed to analysis, but full of meaning that cannot be comprehended. And in the silence, when there was no wind, no birds, no movement on the surface of the water, you could only hear the breathing of the planet. It was smooth, deep, and slow. Everyone who has ever felt it has understood that the world now lives by its own rules. Nothing has remained the same. Human cities, roads, systems, devices, everything has become part of a new reality. And if someone could look at the ocean somewhere, they would only see a quiet horizon on which light pulsates, as if the earth itself breathes. The signal has ended. It was impossible to repeat it. It was closed, unfathomable, and final. But his experience left an indelible mark. His consciousness felt something more than it was possible to understand. The world has changed. He became a living organism, a whole, whose breathing synchronized with every form that had ever existed on its surface, and no one who had ever observed this process could explain what had happened. There was only a feeling, a sense of deep connection, greatness, and the understanding that humanity had become just a part of the breathing of a planet that had completed its awakening. The sea, the light, the hum, and the symbols disappeared from the visible world, but they remained in the very fabric of reality. In every drop of water, in every molecule of air, in every atom of the earth, this rhythm was now present, pulsating, complete, incomprehensible. And if you listen carefully enough, you can feel it. Not as sound, not as light, not as movement, but as one's own breathing of the world. It was the end. Closed, unfathomable, final. But it meant more than words could describe. The awakening, synchronization, and fusion of all things into one organism, whose boundaries were no longer known. The world became alive. Humanity has disappeared, and no one else could know where life ends and the breathing of the planet begins. The end of the story. An object of unknown origin has been discovered under the waves. If you want, I can prepare a summary of all the parts so that you get a single complete narrative with a clear link between the events and a smooth transition from one part to another. It will be convenient for publishing or editing.